All right, so my grandmother passed away the other day, and I figure I should let you all know, because for those of you who have been watching my channel for a while, you know that I frequently quote my grandmother, and I always say my grandmother always says, and now I realize I'm going to have to transition that phrase into my grandmother always said. This is not going to be a sobbing video, because if there's anybody's life that should be celebrated, it's my grandmother's. She lived to 103 years old. She was literally born on leap year in 1916. So technically, actually, that makes her only 25 3/4. She was born during World War I, lived through the Great Depression, lived through World War II, lived through the advent of all of the technology that we take for granted today. She was the first on her side to be born in Canada. She had 2 kids, my father and my aunt. From them, she had 8 grandkids. From them, she had 21 great-grandkids and 1 great-great-grandkid. And when I say I want to celebrate my grandmother's life, I want to put together now the things that she always used to say, one of which was, you count money, you don't count loved ones. And when everyone used to ask her, how many grandkids do you have? She would say, I don't count grandkids, I count money. It was fantastic, and it was consistent. And another thing she always said, and not she just said it, she lived by it, is if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything. And I was trying to think of an example last night when I was sleeping, well, not when I was sleeping, but when I was awake, as to when she may have ever not actually lived by that principle, and I can't think of one exception to when she actually said something bad about somebody as opposed to not saying anything. And it's amazing. I mean, she never saw Twitter. I don't think she would have gotten Twitter even if she did see it, but Twitter might have shocked her in terms of that life philosophy. And the amazing thing is she always remained optimistic. Her life was one of awesomeness. But her husband, my grandfather, died when she was 60-something, and she lived another 38 years without her husband. Or as she said, she still lived 38 years with her husband, just not with her husband. And that could make some people bitter, that could make some people angry, but my grandmother never got bitter and she never got angry. Another thing she always used to say, birds of feather flock together. That was in reference to my friends in high school. One of the other classic things she used to say is, great minds think alike, and fools seldom differ. And I never really understood how to take that. She used to tell me about life in Canada when she was growing up, how they would go to the St. Lawrence River and haul out cubes of ice to put in the fridge to keep things cool, I think during the winter or throughout the summer. She lived in this city before it was what it is. I used to show her the videos on YouTube, and she didn't really appreciate at that time in her life what a cell phone was and what these videos were. She lived an amazing life, and everyone should be so fortunate to live to that age. She passed relatively quickly, but the last few years of her life at that age were not necessarily the best years of her life, but she got pleasure out of life. She was surrounded by loved ones and friends and family, and she just passed. And the amazing thing about the process of death, and I saw it with my father-in-law when it happened to him. I said it to my wife, like when she gave birth, I noticed that the body goes through a transformation during the delivery process, during the whole birthing process. And when I saw my father-in-law pass away and when I saw my grandmother pass away, it's like the same sort of transition, but in the exact opposite sense in some way. It's not horrifying and it's not shocking, it's just you realize that there's transition into life, which is what childbirth is, and then there's transition into death. And the body just sort of transforms and changes and sort of gets ready to go back to where it came from, so to speak. It was peaceful, and it was surrounded by people that she loved, and you can't ask for anything more than that. And the other interesting thing that I just noticed about death as a phenomenon is that it's generational when it happens in the ordinary course of things. People, it's one person dies at a certain age, and then, the next generation gets to be that age and starts dying as well. And this thing happens in life where people sort of get separated as the years go by, and then somebody dies, and then people get reunited in that death, and that's sort of the process of death and life and reunification. And we're living it now. I say it's always hard. The hardest part of the death of an elderly person, I think it was Stephen Colbert who said it when he came back after his mother died, it's not because someone gets really old that somehow it's easier to deal with the death. It's almost like that aura is even bigger that has just been extinguished. And it's hard to see how hard it is on other people. And, you know, it is what it is. Life is going to go on. Life went on for my grandmother for the 38 years after my grandfather passed. People are going to live with the good memories, and people are going to live with the good lessons, and that is pretty much my thoughts and my reflections on this time. So that is it. That is my eulogy to my grandmother.